What's up, guys? Welcome to Just Right. I'm Paul Manicone. Thank you for joining me. And thank you for coming back for part 3 in the Kamala Lies series. In part 1, we talked about her lies about the Trump tax cuts and the economy. And in part 2, we talked about her lies regarding COVID. I'm going to put a link up to both videos. Please watch it. I think you'll find it informative and entertaining. Today, we're going to talk about more of her lies. We're going to start with fracking.
A lot to get to. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president, you said you wanted to ban fracking. Now you don't. You wanted mandatory government buyback programs for assault weapons. Now your campaign says you don't. You supported decriminalizing border crossings. Now you're taking a harder line. I know you say that your values have not changed. So then why have so many of your policy positions changed?
So my values have not changed, and I'm going to discuss at least every point that you've made. But in particular, let's talk about fracking because we're here in Pennsylvania. I made that very clear in 2020. I will not ban fracking.
You made the same claim in the CNN interview.
When you were in Congress, you supported the Green New Deal. And in 2019, you said, quote, "There is no question I'm in favor of banning fracking." Fracking, as you know, is a pretty big issue, particularly in your must-win state of Pennsylvania.
Sure.
Do you still want to ban fracking?
No, and I made that clear on the debate stage in 2020.
No, you didn't. You absolutely did not make that clear. This is what she's talking about.
First of all, I will repeat, and the American people know, that Joe Biden will not ban fracking. That is a fact. That is a fact.
You said Joe Biden wasn't going to ban fracking, but Joe's not running. You are. And the last time you were running, you said this.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. So, yes, and starting with what we can do on day one around public lands, right? And then there has to be legislation. But yes, and this is something I've taken on in California. I have a history of working on this issue.
You do have a history of working on this issue. In fact, when you were the Attorney General of California, you sued the Obama administration because you didn't want them fracking along the California coastline. You took Joe and Barry to court to prevent them from fracking. Now listen to her mislead you about the Inflation Reduction Act creating new leases for drilling.
I will not ban fracking. I have not banned fracking as Vice President of the United States. And in fact, I was the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which opened new leases for fracking. I cast the tie-breaking vote that actually increased leases for fracking as Vice President.
More dishonesty from Kamala. She did cast the tie-breaking vote, that is true, but she's purposely leaving out the most important part. Joe and Kamala knew that if the bill did not contain a provision to extend leasing for drilling, that it wouldn't get passed. So she and Joe put that in the bill. But what do you think they did right after the bill was passed? They paused the program. Here's what they said. The analyses from the Department of Energy are 5 years old and no longer adequately accounts for the latest assessment of greenhouse gas emissions and the perilous impacts of methane on our planet. You see the scam? Promise to extend new leases, so you put it in the bill, so everybody votes in favor of it, get the bill passed, and then change your mind. And they didn't just pause new leases, they destroyed existing leases by adding extra fees. When an oil company drills on federal land, they have to kick up money to the government. It's called a royalty payment. That percentage has been the same for the last 104 years. But Joe and Kamala, through the Inflation Reduction Act, raised that fee 33%. It also raised the minimum amount an oil company could bid for a lease fivefold. Not 5%, it raised it by a factor of 5. It also increased the amount paid for a bond by a factor of 15. Again, not 15%. It made it 15 times more expensive what it had been since 1960. What does this tell you? Number one, the Inflation Reduction Act had nothing to do with inflation. It was only a push for green energy and to punish big oil. In fact, even Joe Biden admits this. The second thing this tells us is that Kamala hates big oil. And if she gets elected, she's going to reimpose the ban on fracking. She's going to say we reevaluated it and we realized that a ban needs to be in place. Are you listening, Pennsylvania? Not only will this affect Pennsylvania, but it's going to drive oil and gas prices up for everyone. Now listen to her lie about oil production.
My position is that we have got to invest in diverse sources of energy so we reduce our reliance on foreign oil. We have had the largest increase in domestic oil production in history.
That's another lie. When Trump took office in January of 2017, we were producing 8.8 million barrels of oil per day. Exactly 3 years into office, Trump raised it to 12.8 million barrels per day just before COVID. That's an increase of more than 44%. Let's see what Joe and Kamala did during their first 3 years of office. When they came into office, we were producing 11.1 million barrels per day. 3 years into the Biden-Harris administration, they got it up to 12.5 million barrels per day. That's an increase of only 12%. Trump increased production 44%. Yet she goes out there and she says she's had the biggest increase in oil production in history. And that is an apples to apples comparison. Trump's first 3 years in office compared to Joe and Kamala's first 3 years in office. But if you wanted to completely ignore COVID and pretend it didn't happen, Trump still has her beat. From the day of inauguration until today's most recent figures, Trump increased oil production by 23%. She and Joe increased it by only 21. But again, she's not just claiming that she increased oil production more than Trump. She's saying she increased it more than anybody, which is just not true. In fact, even Obama had a larger increase in oil production than you did, Kamala. You're just lying. And by the way, no fact check. Now let's listen to her talk about her housing plan.
As it relates to my values, let me tell you, I grew up a middle-class kid raised by a hardworking mother who worked and saved and was able to buy our first home when I was a teenager. The values I bring to the importance of home ownership, knowing not everybody got handed $400 million on a silver platter and then filed bankruptcy 6 times, is a value that I bring to my work to say we are going to work with the private sector and home builders to increase 3 million homes, increase by 3 million homes by the end of my first term.
Kamala wants to build 3 million new homes. This isn't the first time Kamala promised to build something. Do you remember when she and Joe passed the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill in November of 21? You can see Kamala standing next to him clapping. Part of that bill set aside $7.5 billion to build charging stations, places where you can go and plug your car in to charge it. Joe and Kamala promised to build 500,000 of them. Look at this date, December of 21. Do you know how many charging stations they actually built 3 years later? 7. Not 7,000, 7. They promised to build 500,000, and 3 years later, they're still in single digits. And she expects you to believe that she's going to build 3 million new homes? Here's another example of her empty promises and incompetence. Part of that bill also set aside $65 billion for broadband. Here's Kamala 3 years ago telling us how great it's going to be.
Today, we are here to continue our work together to connect every person in America with high-speed internet. Our plan would build broadband infrastructure, like laying fiber optic cables, to reach 100% of our population. Today, 24 million people in our country do not have access to high-speed internet, either because they cannot afford the monthly cost of a plan, or because they live in communities that have not yet been fully connected to fiber optic networks. But let us agree, in the 21st century in America, high-speed internet is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Every person in our nation, no matter where they live, should be able to access and afford high-speed internet. And that is why our administration invested $65 billion to give millions of families a $30 discount on their monthly internet bills, and to lay thousands of miles of new fiber optic lines. And we would ensure that every American, no matter where they live, no matter how much they have in terms of income, and therefore how much they can afford to pay, would be able to access high-speed internet at home.
$42 billion of that package was to be used to install fiber optic cable. You heard her say it was going to cover 100% of the population. 24 million people didn't have it, and this program was going to ensure that they did. Do you know how many people actually got it 3 years later? 0. 0. They promised 24 million, and not a single person got it. Politico blames it on politics, but you need to dig deeper. And of course, the media refused to do it. So I did. Here's what I found. The name of that program was called BEAD, B-E-A-D. The B stands for broadband, which makes sense. What do you think the E stands for? Remember, this is a Kamala program. The E, of course, stands for equity. Here she is explaining why it's very important to deliver fiber optic cable based on race.
The third barrier is equity, and the disparities are clear. Fewer Black and brown Americans use home broadband than white Americans.
In the last video, I showed her explaining why hurricane relief needs to be allocated based on race, but here it's fiber optic cable. And Kamala is not just obsessed with who's getting the cable, she's also obsessed with who's installing it. Because not only does this bill require union workers to install the cable, but it also requires them to be felons. Not making it up, it's in the bill. They want people who install the equipment to have criminal records. Can you imagine the equity nonsense attached to this bill? And we haven't even addressed the cost. Remember, the median sales price of a home today is $412,000. Multiply that by 3 million homes, and we're at $1.2 trillion. But even if she got elected, she's not going to build anything. This is another one of her empty promises. Remember, 500,000 charging stations were promised. We got 7. 24 million people were promised broadband. Not a single person got it. That's all you need to know. She's saying whatever she can to get elected. Now let's go to her other statement about the down payment assistance.
I have a plan that is about allowing people to be able to pursue what has been fleeting in terms of the American dream by offering a help with down payment of $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. That's the kind of conversation, I believe, David, that people really want tonight.
I'm going to prove to you that this woman knows absolutely nothing about economics. But first, we need to establish something. What's a first-time home buyer? According to current FHA guidelines, a first-time home buyer is someone who hasn't owned a home in the last 3 years. This country's got 330 million people, and a third of them are renters. If just half of those renters utilize this program, that's 55 million people. If Kamala gave $25,000 to each of those 55 million home buyers, it would cost $1.4 trillion. But it's more than that, because based on current guidelines, spouses do not qualify. So if the house you live in now is in your spouse's name and not yours, but the two of you decide to go out and buy a second home together, you count as a first-time home buyer. So the $1.4 trillion figure I gave you is going to be much higher because the program isn't limited to just renters. It also includes homeowners. But forget about price for a second. This program is flawed for another reason. What do you think would happen to the current cost of housing if every person who wanted to buy a home suddenly got an extra $25,000 to purchase one? What do you think it would do to the housing market? It would artificially raise the cost of housing. Kamala is too dumb to realize that if every person who wanted to buy a home got an extra $25,000 to purchase one, sellers would just raise their asking price by the same amount. That's exactly what happened when Congress passed a $7,500 tax credit to purchase electric vehicles. As soon as that bill went into effect, automakers simply raised their price by the same amount. I'll give you another example. I know Kamala's never heard of the Bennett hypothesis, but this is what it is. William Bennett was the Secretary of Education in the 1980s. In 1987, he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times claiming that increasing student financial aid simply allows universities to charge more. Bennett argued that businesses would adjust their prices based on how much their customers were willing to pay. In this case, the businesses were the colleges and the customers were the students. So the more money provided to students in financial aid, or the more money students had to spend on college, the more colleges would raise their tuition. And this makes perfect sense. And it's true. In fact, the Bank of New York did a study and found that for every additional dollar in financial aid, colleges raised their tuition by 60 cents. And that's bad for everyone because the price of school goes up for all students, but not all students qualify for financial aid. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because there is a disconnect between Kamala Harris and reality. When she and Joe announced the loan forgiveness program, colleges raised their tuition prices in direct proportion to that plan. Government gives money for electric vehicles, and the car manufacturers raise their prices. You give more money to students and allow them to borrow more without having to pay it back, and colleges raise their prices. And if you give $25,000 to every home buyer, sellers would raise their prices. This is simple, basic economics, which this woman simply does not understand. Now let's go to her lying about defunding the police.
Defund the police. She's been against that forever. She was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she went out.
Now you saw her shake her head no and deny it, right? You could actually hear her say, that's not true. Even though the mics were cut, you could still hear it. Here she is.
Defund the police. The issue behind it is that we need to reimagine how we are creating safety. And when you have many cities that have 1/3 of their entire city budget focused on policing, we know that is not the smart way and the best way or the right way to achieve safety.
In many cities in America, over 1/3 of their city budget goes to police. So we have to have this conversation.
Well, the way that we achieve that is we, one, don't spend over 1/3 of a city's budget on policing. This whole movement is about rightly saying, we need to take a look at these budgets and figure out whether it reflects the right priorities. Frankly, it's ass backwards.
It is.
Because what it's been is about people confusing the concept and then putting money into budgets and requesting money to go into police budgets to create safety.
Isn't that incredible how she could stand there and adamantly deny what we know to be true? I want to put 2 links up to 2 videos I made. One is called The Gift of Lying. And in that video, I discuss how easily the Democrats lie, their history of lying, and how they mastered the art of deception. I'll put a link up, please click on it. The second video I want you to look at is called Dem Liars. The reason I made that video is because once Defund the Police went into effect and crime started running rampant, the Democrats actually had the nerve to pin the Defund the Police movement on Republicans. So I had to make a video to call them out on it. Please click on it. I think you'll enjoy it. Now listen to her say one of the most idiotic statements I've ever heard a politician make.
It's been upside down, which is for too long, people have confused achieving public safety with putting more cops on the street. For too long, the status quo thinking has been you get more safety by putting more cops on the street. Well, that's wrong.
We have confused the idea that to achieve safety, you put more cops on the street. Part of what has been upside down in policing policy in America is that we have confused having safe communities with hiring more cops on the street. The status quo way of thinking about achieving safety is really wrong when it assumes that the best way to achieve more safety is to put more police on the streets. It is outdated. It is wrong-headed thinking to think that the only way you're going to get communities to be safe is to put more police officers on the street. What we have to do, and what we will do, is reimagine public safety.
You and I know that the best way to fight crime is to put more cops on the street. Put them out there and let them make arrests. Let's say you're the commanding officer of a precinct and you discover after analyzing all of the data that there's a robbery pattern in the northern end of the precinct. And let's say it's happening between 8 p.m. and midnight on the weekends. That's where you're going to put all your resources. That's where you're going to put all of your cops, some in uniform, some out of uniform, but you're going to focus on that area like a laser, and eventually you will get the guy or the people that are committing these robberies. Not doing that, not putting cops where you know they need to be, would be law enforcement malpractice. And the people who are complaining that there are too many cops in that area would be the first ones complaining that crime has gone up because those cops were taken away. At the end of that statement, you heard her say, reimagine the police. That became her new favorite term. Take a listen.
I think that a big part of this conversation really is about reimagining how we do public safety in America. which I support. We have to reimagine public safety in America. Again, we need to reimagine how we are achieving public safety in America. And so it's about reimagining. And so we really do need to understand and reimagine what and how we can actually make and help make communities safe.
We need to reimagine how we are creating safety.
We must reimagine what public safety looks like.
And she's not the only Democrat with that talking point. They all say it.
The folks in law enforcement that share the goals of reimagining policing.
Reimagining policing in the 21st century.
Rethinking and reimagining policing.
Community efforts to reimagine policing.
To reimagine policing.
We have to reimagine what policing looks like.
Reimagining policing, reimagining our public safety.
Reimagine a citizen-led approach.
We can begin to reimagine law enforcement.
Reimagine public safety in this country.
We reimagine what public safety should look like in our community.
Reimagining public safety.
To reimagine public safety.
What can we do to reimagine public safety?
That last idiot reimagining police was LA Mayor Eric Garcetti. Here's Kamala praising him. I'm going to wait to show you what he did. Let's listen to Kamala first.
We've got to re-examine what we're doing with American taxpayer dollars and ask the question, are we getting the right return on our investment? Are we actually creating healthy and safe communities? And that's a legitimate conversation, and it requires a really critical evaluation. I applaud Eric Garcetti for doing what he's done.
Now, what do you think he did? For Kamala to praise him so much, what do you think this mayor did? I'll let Tucker explain it.
In the city of Los Angeles, Mayor Eric Garcetti looks out across the worst rioting in the nation's second largest city in a generation, in almost 30 years. His conclusion? We need far fewer police. It could have been better if they hadn't been there. Garcetti has announced he's going to cut funding for law enforcement.
I want you to know we will not be increasing our police budget. Our city, through our city administrative officer, identified $250 million in cuts.
She's so proud of him, she applauded him for cutting $150 million from his police budget. Now, here's the second dumbest thing I've ever heard a politician say. It is so dumb that even AOC is saying it.
When people ask me, what does a world where we defund the police, where defunding police looks like, I tell them it looks like a suburb. Many affluent suburbs have essentially already begun pursuing a defunding of the police.
The reality of it is that if you go to middle or upper middle class suburbia, you will not see that police presence. If you contrast, many communities which have a heavy presence of police to middle and upper middle class suburbs in America, you will not see that presence of police. Many in America right now already live in places with minimal police presence. Go to any middle and upper class suburb, and you will not see the kind of presence of police that you see in other neighborhoods. When you go to the suburbs, upper middle class suburbs, you don't see that police presence.
Okay, let me explain this in one sentence. The suburbs aren't safe because police aren't there. Police aren't there because the suburbs are safe. I can't believe this needs to be explained to her. It reminds me of an article in the New York Times where someone wrote in complaining, why are there so many people in jail at a time where crime is at an all-time low? Not realizing, of course, the reason why crime is at an all-time low is because all of the criminals are off the street. They're in jail. It is idiotic that they can't grasp this concept. Anyway, I'm running long. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying to the end. Please join me for part 4. I think we're going to do it on the border. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. Please give me a thumbs up, share it, and comment. I read and answer all of the comments. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you for part 4.